These movies certainly didn't fail because of these specific moments. Well, most of them didn't. But these scenes would have benefited from getting it done in post, rather than fastidiously committing to doing it during shooting. I am Gareth, this is Whatculture, and here are times movies should have used CGI. Casino. Martin Scorsese tends to make more effective use of CGI in his movies than almost any other filmmaker, typically deploying quote-unquote invisible CGI to extend sets and basically immerse the audience deeper in the world of the story he's telling. But you know what would have immersed us all deeper in the world of his 1995 mob classic Casino? Getting rid of that damn dirty mannequin at the start. The very first shot of the film shows protagonist Sam Ace Rothstein getting into his car just as a bomb blows it up, apparently killing him. That sequence was achieved in camera, with Scorsese simply cutting between a locked-off shot of De Niro getting into the car and another of the car blowing up with a mannequin inside. The problem is, the mannequin looks not even remotely like De Niro, nor any human being really, ensuring an otherwise thrilling opening is rendered laughable to all who notice the gaffe. Scorsese likely assumed that nobody would ever see the film in high enough resolution for it to be an issue, but alas, once Casino hit Blu-ray, it became glaringly obvious. Even back in 1995, it wouldn't have been terribly difficult to composite the car window from the previous take to have De Niro sat inside the car when it blows up. Hell, one fan got fed up enough of waiting for Scorsese to fix it that they just did it themselves. How impressive.
You don't need me to tell you that it's a crazy, unpredictable world out there, and for movies that means mergers, acquisitions, licensing weirdness, and a whole bunch of other things that can stop you from watching the stuff you want to watch, and when. You'll be there scrolling, looking for, I don't know, the 1987 horror vampire classic Near Dark, only to find that it's nowhere to be found. Like, what's with that? Luckily, our good pal Norton VPN, who I'm still calling Ed Norton VPN for full, much to the chagrin of my employers, is here to help us movie lovers out by letting us watch what we want, when we want. Scan the QR code on screen or use the link in the description and you can get 54% off your first year's subscription, working out as little as $4.17 per month, or £2.50 a month if you're in the UK like yours truly. Again, that's less than $5 a month to watch the stuff you love and look after your privacy while you do it. And hey, if you decide you don't want to keep going, Norton also has a 60-day money-back guarantee too, which is just proper lovely it is. A big thank you to Norton for sponsoring this video. You are, and always have been, my favorite Norton.
Jurassic Park 3. Jurassic Park 3 gets a lot of justified flack for its terrible script, awful characters, and horrendous anti-climax of an ending. But credit where credit's due. The CGI dinosaurs still look fantastic, and will likely age better than any of the digital dinos in the recent Jurassic World trilogy. But the threequel also includes extensive dinosaur animatronics, and while most of them look pretty solid throughout, the practical Spinosaurus just doesn't pass muster. During the opening plane crash sequence in particular, the Spinosaurus looks laughably fake, with its gormless, expressionless face and blatant lack of articulation compared to both the digital version and other animatronic dinos throughout the movie. Given the enormous effort that the late great Stan Winston and his team put into making the Spinosaurus prop, it was 44 feet long and weighed 13 tons. It would have surely been easier to just render this particular dinosaur entirely with CGI. In part, the problem might be that nobody photographs an animatronic dinosaur quite like Steven Spielberg. But all the same, the film's CGI dinos are spectacular enough that they should have done most of the heavy lifting here. Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. The only example on this list where the filmmaker was bothered enough and had sufficient creative power to go back and fix it is that god-awful Yoda puppet from The Phantom Menace. While George Lucas receives plenty of well-earned criticism for excessively relying on emergent digital filmmaking tech for the Star Wars prequels, the original theatrical release of The Phantom Menace indeed realized Yoda with a rather ropey-looking puppet. As charming as the original Yoda puppet was, the one created for the prequels looked rough, and further stuck out due to the incredibly digital world it was presented within. For the film's 2011 Blu-ray release, however, Lucas replaced the puppet with a digital double which looks so much better, and ensures Yoda's appearance is consistent across the prequel trilogy. For all of the many overzealous changes Lucas has made to Star Wars over the years, he was absolutely right to do it in this case. Oh yeah, and just a quick thanks for checking out this video today. If you like what you see, then go and tap on that subscribe button down below, baby. In time. Andrew Niccol's promising yet disappointing sci-fi film In Time boasts some solid world building for its modest $40 million budget, but this apparently didn't extend to a convincing model car prop. Midway through the movie, when protagonists Will and Sylvia are run off the road, we cut to an outrageously bad shot of a scale model car flying off said road and flipping down an embankment, before cutting back to a full-size car landing on its wheels. Everything about this is so wrong. The perspective fails to disguise the scale of what's very obviously a miniature car toy. The weight of the car flying through the air is completely off, which could have been remedied by shooting in slow motion, and the fact that neither Will nor Sylvia are ejected from the car is also rather ridiculous. Evidently, the production was a little overconfident in their ability to execute this shot practically, because while flipping cars digitally isn't totally easy to get right, a slightly blurry CGI car would have incited a lot less laughter than this daft Matchbox car stunt. X-Men Apocalypse. X-Men Apocalypse is by far the most disappointing of all the X-Men movies, largely because it does almost nothing interesting with the arrival of its much anticipated villain, Apocalypse. Oscar Isaac isn't given all that much to do, and more to the point, his underwhelming stature and silly looking makeup and costume design just don't even remotely convince that we're looking at a god-tier mutant. The Thanos of the Fox X-Men movies, basically. Thanos is an apt counterpoint, in fact, because it's painfully clear that director Bryan Singer should have instead had Isaac perform the part through performance capture, just as Josh Brolin did for Thanos in the MCU. Given that X-Men Apocalypse rocked a $178 million budget, it certainly had the coffers to make it happen, and in turn would have been able to realize the supervillain as the genuinely larger-than-life character he's supposed to be. Instead, and no offense to Isaac here, he just ended up looking like a fairly committed cosplayer. Kingsman: The Secret Service. Kingsman: The Secret Service's most memorable scene is unquestionably the ultra-violent church massacre, where villain Richmond Valentine activates a phone signal which causes everyone inside, that is Harry Hart and a bunch of right-wing tossbags, to start brutally murdering one another. The gloriously over-the-top sequence set to Freebird certainly uses its fair share of CGI, from digitally stitching shots together to resemble a smooth single take, to oodles of digital blood, and more cartoonish moments like Harry setting a man's head on fire. There is one moment of practical in-camera mayhem that just doesn't work at all though, when Harry rams a man face first into a church pew, causing his body to basically fold up like an accordion. Ultimately, the very obvious rubber mannequin used for the sequence makes it more hilariously silly than bone-crunchingly brutal. And this is probably something that director Matthew Vaughn should have just tweaked a little digitally in post-production. You live, you learn though, eh? The animatronic bear, the Wolverine. An early scene in 2013's The Wolverine sees Logan come across a dying grizzly bear in the woods and put it out of its misery with his sharp claws. Though the brief glimpse of the bear earlier in the film was achieved digitally, for this sequence the production opted to use a 12-foot animatronic. And while it's great that Hugh Jackman had something tangible to work opposite, the rather dated-looking prop doesn't really hold up in a film so awash with digital effects elsewhere. The bear animatronic genuinely looks like something Hollywood would have used decades ago, with its literally robotic movements failing to convince that we're actually looking at anything close to a real grizzly. Even with the scene smartly taking place at night, which should in theory conceal many of the rougher seams, the frequent lightning flashes make it overwhelmingly obvious that we're looking at a cheap, hokey prop. Given that James Mangold was playing with a $132 million budget here, this scene needed to use CGI, right? Now, this may not have been a great X-Men movie moment, but what's been your favourite of all time? You let me know in the comments section down below. The ship crash Speed 2 Cruise Control. Speed 2 Cruise Control climaxes with the runaway cruise ship crashing into an island, where it causes enormous damage to the pier and surrounding town. Director Jan de Pont was fiercely determined to shoot the scene for real, rather than using miniatures or CGI, spending a stonking $25 million, a quarter of the movie's entire budget, to build a life-size replica of the ship and have it driven on rails through a purpose-built pier. It sounds awesome in theory, but the reality is that the final scene mostly ends up looking like it was just shot with miniatures anyway. At which point you have to question why De Pont spaffed so much of his budget on doing it at scale. CGI was certainly in an advanced enough state by 1997, this being the same year that Titanic was released, to execute the ship crash effectively. And it probably wouldn't have been as costly or time-consuming as building a huge set and crashing a hydraulic ship into it. The Animatronic Spiders, Jumanji, 1995. Now, to be completely fair to 1995's original Jumanji, the film has its share of poorly aged CGI that didn't even look particularly good at the time, namely those nightmare-fuel-inducing digital monkeys. But director Joe Johnston went purely practical for the memorable sequence where, near the end of the movie, the heroes are attacked by a fleet of giant spiders. Said spiders are very obviously plastic animatronics, looking less like the articulate props you'd expect to see in a major Hollywood production than something that was rigged up at your local haunted house around Halloween. This isn't to say the animatronics don't have a certain kitschy slung-together charm of their own, but the fact that they're clearly being piloted mechanically undercuts how terrifying they should appear to the audience. The limitations of animatronic movement also mean that when the spiders finally scuttle away, Johnston had no choice but to speed up the footage, which ends up looking silly in a bad way. If there was anything in the movie worth devoting some VFX resources to, it was surely this, right? Look at those silly little critters. Ezekiel Sims botched ADR, Madam Web. There are so many things wrong with Madam Web. But perhaps the most egregious thing of all is the bafflingly bad voiceover dubbing for the film's villain Ezekiel Sims, played by the talented Tahar Rahim. In almost every scene in which he appears, it's painfully clear that Rahim re-recorded his lines in post-production for reasons unknown. Sims' spoken dialogue is frequently out of sync with his mouth movements, sounds too clean compared to the environment he's in, and much of the time the filmmakers have conspicuously edited their way around showing his mouth at all. Clearly something went very wrong here, but the fix-it-in-post mentality doesn't have to mean merely trying to dub and edit your way out of a tough spot. In recent years, digital mouth replacement and sync technology has come on leaps and bounds. Enough that even the $3 million thriller Fall used deepfakes to remove profanity from actors' lines, allowing the film to be released with a PG-13 rating. In that movie, the result is near impossible to spot. And if a film made for so little money could pull it off, there's no reason that this $100 million superhero blockbuster couldn't employ similar effects techniques to tidy up the dodgy lip sync. The Jaguar puppet, Apocalypto. Mel Gibson's Apocalypto is a brilliantly visceral period thriller that gets so much right, but comes unstuck during the sequence where protagonist Jaguar Paw sicks a black jaguar on his pursuers, which kills one of their number before they stab it to death. Poor kitty. Obviously, most of the sequence wasn't shot using a real jaguar, though rather than realize the attack through primarily digital means, it was instead a crude combination of occasional CGI and a goofy-looking animatronic puppet. In many shots, it's hilariously obvious that a stiff, scarcely animate jaguar puppet has been thrown at the actors and is being clumsily manipulated by a stagehand off-screen, when, given the chaotic nature of the sequence, an entirely CGI jaguar would have probably passed muster quite easily. Sequences like this are tough to pull off on tight budgets, and with Apocalypto being made for a fairly svelte $40 million, it evidently didn't quite stretch to a fully digital animal. The Trinity test, Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan's epic biopic Oppenheimer is centered entirely around the pivotal Trinity nuclear weapon test. And per his career-long commitment to doing things the hard way, he decided to shoot the massive explosion entirely practically, prompting some to joke that he was going to film a real nuclear detonation. You wouldn't put it past him, would you? The film sequence was achieved by creating a smaller practical explosion and using forced perspective tricks to make the fireball appear larger than it actually was. And while it's a dazzling scene, it does also end up feeling a tad underbaked. It ultimately just feels like Nolan zoomed in on a pretty big explosion, but the uncanny eeriness of a real nuclear detonation just isn't really there. Had Nolan used CGI to enhance the scale and ferocity of the Trinity test, it likely would have had a far more visceral impact upon the average viewer. Though Nolan's deference towards getting as much as possible captured in camera is laudable, in this case it also ended up undermining his work, as a mixture of practical and digital techniques was clearly the right way to go. The Practical Liquor, Resident Evil 2002. The climax to 2002's original Resident Evil film sees Alice and the other remaining heroes face off against the mutated final form of the Liquor, which has been pursuing them throughout the movie. The licker attacks them on a train as they make their escape out of the umbrella facility known as the Hive, with the creature being realised through an iffy combination of CGI and practical elements. But the end result makes it howlingly clear that director Paul W.S. Anderson should have gone fully digital. The shots of the practical licker animatronic are extremely stiff, presumably due to its limited mobility, enough that Anderson is evidently forced to choppily cut around it in an attempt to disguise how clunky it actually is. The CGI for the scene isn't great either, but at least it gives the licker the mobility and menace that the sequence requires. Instead, splitting the difference between CGI and a naff animatronic feels like a misguided half measure and somewhat undermines this licking terror. Fully CGI was the way to go, Paul.